Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have a great guest. We're going to talk about business. We're going to talk about operations. We're going to talk about increasing your bottom line. Okay. Before we get to that, make sure to leave me a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. That just helps get more eyes on it, more ears on it. And make sure to subscribe. Also, you guys don't want to miss any episodes. We have some great ones coming up also. Today, my guest is Wayne Washington. They call him the Doctor of Operations. How about that? He helps CEOs sustain growth by eliminating hidden costs, disengaged employees, and unnecessary complexity. Man, that's music to my ears. Welcome to the show, Wayne.
Thank you for having me, Allan. I really appreciate being here.
So, Wayne, give us a little background. Tell us about who you are and how you got to become the Doctor of Operations.
It's a long journey. I'm not a spring chicken, I guess, as you can say. I graduated from college back in 1973, so I can give you an idea of my age. But I got an electrical engineering degree. I was from a small school called Ohio Northern University. So I have a analytical background. I've been taught to think logically. I've been taught to analyze things. So that has helped me throughout my career over the years. I think where the best place to probably start is when I moved here to Evansville, Indiana. I work for a company called Mead Johnson. They're the people who make the infant milk baby formula. And I started out in a project engineering role, but eventually I moved into the maintenance department. In the maintenance department is where I was given a task to transform the maintenance department from a paper and pencil system into a computerized maintenance management system. We basically had a team of about 12 people, and we put them in a room for about a year, and they did it for all the divisions, and we basically came back with a maintenance management system. What I was basically saying, when I went to facility maintenance, when you think about starting a computerized process, you look at your systems first before you start computerizing, because garbage in, garbage out was the thing I learned. Well, that process resulted in us having over a 3-year period, after we have had things implemented for a budget where I had a budget about $18 million, had about 118 employees, had a capital budget about $5 million. We reduced our operating costs an average of 7% a year for 3 consecutive years. And for that kind of operations, it was pretty significant. It had a major impact. Well, the other thing that came about that, we had a reorganization about that time. And I was moved into what they call the site group, that had responsibility for all the buildings, the infrastructure, the cleaning, the maintenance, and those type of things. And I was assigned a group of people who were roughly between 45 and 60 years old. And I don't know if you do those kind of people, getting them to change is not the most easiest thing to do. And that was at the era when outsourcing was raging. So back in 1994. And how do we get those people to get on board to outsource? Now, that was where I feel I learned the most about working with people and getting people to get on board for a common purpose. Is we made the outsourcer the enemy. And these old guys came together and they started giving me ideas as to how we reduce our costs. How do we do things betterly? How do we do things faster? They even came up with a slogan, let's do things better, faster, and cheaper than the outsourcers. And we even had t-shirts and stuff like that. But that was something that was done back in 1994 and 1994 to 97. And what that has been inside of me ever since then is, how do you take people who have a lot of different avenues, different agendas, bring them together for a common cause and work for a common goal? The same thing happened. I learned that when we worked with the computerized maintenance process. You're bringing 12 people together from 12 different departments and trying to get down to organize that computerized system. You got to get them focused. You got to minimize the distraction. So there are some things I feel I learned early in my career to move forward. Well, let me go ahead and take you a little bit forward from there. In 1997, I started my own company here called Facility Management Engineering here in Evansville, Indiana. I lost my job at Mead Johnson, and within 2 weeks of losing that job, I started this company. And within 2 weeks of starting the company, we had our first contract, and we've been going solidly ever since. At the time, I had a partner. I have since brought that partner out. But what we did with FME was the nickname was FME rather than the short name. What we do with FME, we did the same thing I did at Mead Johnson. We basically ran a company facility for them. We took care of their maintenance. We took care of their cleaning. We took care of their purchasing for facility supplies. Anything that had to do with the infrastructure, we would do that for a client. we basically had to model how do you take your facilities and run your facilities like a business. Most people, when they have facilities are like a necessary evil. They just only throw money at it when they need to throw money at it. So we had to change that mindset. We had to help clients change that mindset to make sure you run your facilities as a business. Taking that the next step forward, we've done that for the last, ever since we started business. But back in 2002, roughly, I decided to go ahead and build my own software program, facility management software program. I had it developed. Even then was a cloud-based program back in 2002. We had it developed and we started using that commercially. Take a whole concept forward to, let's say, about 4 or 5 years ago, I started realizing facility management is not the way to grow because people do not want to spend money on facilities. You could talk about saving money, but they don't want to spend money to save money in facilities. As I say, it's like a necessary evil. At that time, I started to change my philosophy and develop a business called Grow Company Profits, where we expanded our concept to look at not just facilities, but look at the overall concept of a business. How do you help a CEO make decisions? How do you help a CEO make progress? Bottom line, it comes down to how do you help a CEO become more profitable, sustain profitability? I'm a believer of if you can sustain profitability, you could fund your own growth. And therefore, you don't need venture capitals. You don't need loans and so forth like that. So how do you take the money that's inside of your business now and put that back into your business? When you read the introduction, you're talking about 3 things that I call my pet peeves: hidden costs, unnecessary complexity, and disengaged employees. Most companies have those things, suffer from those things. They learn to live through those things. I call them value drains because what they're doing is draining value from your business. That's money that's coming from your bottom line. That's money that once it's gone, is gone for good. So what we try to do is how do we look at getting rid of those value drains? So we go back to the other end. And the concept I've learned to use over the last 3 or 4 years is the 3 pillars of any business is your strategy, your culture, and your operations. And if you have your strategy, culture, and operations in alignment, you will eliminate those value drains. You will not have disengaged employees. You will not have hidden costs. You will not have unnecessary complexity. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, visualize a Venn diagram, the 3 circles. One circle's culture, one circle's operations, and one circle strategy. That sweet spot right in the middle is where you're trying to operate to be in alignment. And when you're not in alignment in that sweet spot, you have different ways of operating. Let's say you focus a lot on strategy. The results that translates to your employees, we tell you what to do, you do it because strategy is so important, you're gonna do it my way. If you look at focusing on the standpoint of culture is your strong point, everybody wants to get along. It's like, how do we have fun? It's more like a country club. But if you start focusing solely on operations, it's the bottom line. Make those numbers. Let's get that productivity up. Let's have these cost initiatives. Each one of those has a different pull on the organization. But the thing about it is they all share the same resources. And so when you share the same resources, if you focus on strategy, you can put more resources to strategy. If you focus on culture, you're gonna put more of your emphasis on culture. Same thing with operations. Every company has the same 4 resources they work with: manpower, materials, money, and management. And how efficiently and effectively you use those resources determines how profitable you're going to be and how you can sustain your profitability. So what we look at in order to try to get in that sweet spot where your operations, your culture, and your strategy are all aligned, how do you best utilize your resources? So that's where we were. We started that back in 2016. The thing about it that really has put an emphasis on it for us now, Allan, is back in August, I became a victim of COVID. By that I mean not me personally having COVID. My major account, which accounted for 90% of my business, gone.
Wow.
You talk about a wake-up call. We applied for PPP funding. We got PPP funding, and we're making the transition now. Where we're using the grow company profits as our income now is our main source of operating thing, because I think that has more of a long-term future than trying to work in facilities. So that's kind of the background. I think that's the quick and dirty version of where I've been and where I am.
I love it. I want to rewind a little bit.
Okay.
You talked just a bit about implementing that change with the 45-year-old or 40-year-olds, the 65-year-olds. And change is something that I think it's just in our nature as humans. We just
Hmm.
fight against it, right? And
Yes. Yes.
I think you're right. I think the older we get and the more we get in our routines, the more difficult it is for us to change, even though we might believe that the change is for the better. So, what were some things that you did back then and that you've kind of learned over the years to help people change to effectuate this positive growth?
Okay. And I think it really came down to two things. The first one is it's what's the purpose? Back then, our purpose at that time was to save our jobs. So we were all driven by that. The second thing beyond that is what's that compelling story? That compelling story that everybody has to buy into. And when you have that compelling story, we also took that a step beyond that. We created a group we call our culture club. And that culture club, what they're able to do is they're saying, let's talk about how we want to work with each other, how we respect each other. How do we want to behave with each other? And it ended up becoming a group, what I call working agreements that was all 54 people, including myself, signed those working agreements. And as a matter of fact, I still have a copy of that signature, and it was posted on the wall. So in effect, when everybody signs on to, this is how we're going to treat each other, this is how we're going to respect each other, this is how we're going to learn, this is how we're going to do our work on a day-to-day basis. When everybody does that, accountability becomes a self-accountability. You have that peer pressure that comes in place. So the compelling story with those working agreements was that coupled with the purpose. So you put those two things together, everybody's in that boat rowing together. And when everybody has days that you don't feel like working, but when you have the working agreement and a compelling story, you don't want to let your team member down. You don't want to be that one that drops the ball. So accountability comes back to the self. So even though these guys were 55, 60 years old, they knew they had to pull their weight or they would be out of a job. So I mean, it becomes a self-motivating type of thing.
I think that's interesting that when we're part of a group and kind of moving in the same direction, that motivates us more, right?
Yes.
Us pulling our weight for how it affects the entire
Yep.
group versus just for our own benefit, right? Isn't that interesting that we are more motivated so that we're not the one that's not pulling, his or her weight in the group versus if we're just working for
Right.
ourselves, we don't reach that level of
When you say level of
motivation.
motivation, you could lie to yourself and not pull your weight. I think the analogy I try to look at is look at most sports teams. When you have that from a sports team, if you ever play sports yourself, you don't want to let your team members down. You're going to pull your weight because you do not want to let your team down. The same thing for the service. You don't want to let your Army buddy down, your Navy buddy down. So I think when you come
Right.
together as a team and function as a team, that's where that camaraderie comes together, that esprit de corps comes together, and that's where you have that self-accountability.
I love this concept of a culture club. Will you tell me a little bit more about that? Who
Okay.
were the members that were in? Was it everybody? Kind of tell me a little bit about that dynamic and what it did for the morale and the actual culture
Okay.
of the
And
company.
it was more of a department. Yeah, I just had a small microcosm of the company, but what we basically did is it comprised about 6 people. And these were no one in supervision, no one in management. These were our hourly workers. And I kind of make sure I try to pick people to be on that team. Who are the guys who are the most boisterous? Who are the ones who are the informal leaders? And I wanted to make sure I got 2 or 3 of those people on the team. I also want to get make sure I had a couple of ladies on the team because maintenance back in the 90s was a male-driven, male-dominant type of organization. So I want to make sure we had a female perspective on the team. So those 6 individuals, we had a facilitator from the HR group, and they basically went on their own and met once or twice a week and came up with the work rules. I did not see those work rules until they were done. And when it was
Hmm.
done, by the time they were putting it together, it was their job to go out and sell it to the department and talk to each individual, get input from the department. When it's time to promote that, they were the ones who promoted it. I mean, sold it to me. So When I was seeing it with them, I was seeing it the first time when the entire department was seeing. The thing about it, Alan, they did it, they owned it. And when they took
Right.
it out to try to sell it to everyone else, they were selling to their peers. It was not Wayne saying,
Exactly.
I'm the boss talking down. That's
Yeah.
what the Corporate Club did. You get the people who are at that level who was really important, we had them do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And I've kind of learned that over the years where when you allow your people to be involved in the creation of different elements, aspects of your company, it's a lot easier for them to get behind it, right?
Yes.
Because it's
Yes.
their idea, it's their work, it's their blood, sweat, and tears that are going into this.
Yes.
And I also like this concept of it being, their peers, right? So it's not a group of managers that are saying, just going down the proverbial chain of command. So that I
Well,
think that's such a great idea.
well, the thing about it, if I was in that room where they're trying to have that discussion, they'd be guarded. They wouldn't want to say what they're, but if you're in
Exactly.
there, if you're peers, you'll call somebody a jerk. You'll call them out to
Yeah.
their face where they wouldn't do
Yep.
that if I was there.
Yeah, no, and I think that type of communication, and that's something that I'm working on as a leader is, I don't know whether I do it on purpose or it's just kind of comes with the territory, but I can be a little intimidating, right?
Mhm.
Just because of my role as the
Yes.
owner of a particular business,
Yes.
right? But you need in a company, you need that type of communication where people feel like, hey, I can express my ideas and I can even express them in a blunt way as long as I'm not disrespectful or, I'm not being offensive, but
Correct.
I can express my ideas. And even if it's a borderline quote unquote dumb idea, but it's not going to affect my job. My job's safe. I'm safe. But I think that's such an important part of thinking outside the box, of trying new things within an organization.
Well, I'm gonna take that concept what we just talked about, and let's take it out of the department standpoint, and let's now expand it to the overall company standpoint. And if you want to do that now in today's modern company environment, the days of top-down management, I say you do, is gone. I mean, if you feel you're going
Agreed.
to grow your business, I'm sorry, you're a dinosaur. It's not going to work. The concept now is collaboration and inclusion. We got to have that collaboration of everybody in the department. Everybody's opinion matters, and inclusions. We're not going to leave someone out because they're the janitor, right? So we include everybody. And I think that when I put all that together, the thing that we're trying to get to is a concept called psychological safety. It's got to be a safe zone. You can, when you do express your opinion, no one's going to laugh at you. No one's going to make fun of you because you're
Right.
entitled to your opinion. So I look at how do we establish that psychological contract, that trust, and that's what happens when you have collaboration and inclusion.
Yeah, and I think it's a process, right? It doesn't
Yes.
happen overnight.
Oh no.
And there's a
No.
lot of things that leaders do to to kind of prohibit this type of conversation and behavior, right? There's little things that we do where someone comes in with an idea and we immediately discredit them or we start poking holes in it or whatever, as opposed to having a conversation and kind of, thinking through things. What's interesting is some of the very best ideas coming from some of the companies that I own came from the people that are boots on the ground,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's really hard for me to make a decision about something that I don't do every day. But I love that you said that it's kind of this, this archaic way of thinking that it's top to bottom, right? That's where, and it should be the other way around. The information and ideas should be coming from the bottom up, and the service and the leadership should be coming from the top down, right? This encouragement of having this open conversation, regularly asking your people,
Yes.
regardless of their role, how do we do better? How do I do better?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. And I'm gonna say digress. I'm gonna take that today. You asked me earlier, how did I become the doctor of operations? And I think it really comes down to how do you take that same concept and bring it into an operation standpoint. Usually operation just I had to learn the hard way. Maintenance is the one who gets the last pill. Operations is the afterthought. Usually you'll have your slogans and your campaigns, and oh, by the way, we might need a new machine. Operations is usually an afterthought. So, but if you start thinking about what is the role of operations role is to implement your strategy. You got to take that strategy that might come from the top, but how do you break that down into the recipes, into the step-by-step actions that are used by your people day to day to day? And I say that because I try to use that same concept. I'm gonna digress just a little bit. I love to cook. I've been loving to cook for a number of years, and in doing that, I came up with the concept of a recipe. In other words, instead of them being processes that we work at an organization, what's a recipe? What do you need for the ingredients? What's the equipment you need? What are the steps that you have to have? Step one, step two, step three. Who needs to be involved? So if you take that same concept of a recipe and bring it into your business, and then you take your employees and saying, hey, I'm building this new recipe. How do you think we're going to do this? What should be here? They love that idea, okay? And the term process is foreign. The term workflow is foreign. The term recipe is not. So you try to break things down into a lingo that your frontline people can understand. So we help them involve and get those recipes in place. All right. So then therefore, now you have your recipes in place. If you're a typical business, you have some kind of system where you're putting some kind of product out or some kind of service out week after week after week after week. How do you schedule that? How do you plan that? Right. So you look at the concept of your recipes, and I'm stepping back. What's my weekly meal plan? Okay. If next week, what are the recipes I have to get ready for next week? Then once you know what recipes you have, you got to step back and saying, oh, what do I need from the store? I need these materials. I need this labor. Does it make sense what I'm talking about? Where you take a concept and you break it down to what everybody can understand, something they can identify with, and it works from there.
I really like this idea, right? And I think that opens the door for people to put their thumbprint on a business, right?
Yes.
So how do we do that? How do we, on one hand, create these quote unquote recipes for our company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, hey, this is the system. This is kind of how it's done. These are the tools that we need. This is, it goes, we do this, then we do that. How do we have so we're not reinventing the wheel every single day,
okay,
but at the same time balancing with, hey, we want to hear your ideas. We want you guys to come in here. You're a very talented individual. You're motivated. You have different ideas than I have. How do we mix those two?
Okay. And as the way we've approached it is it's I call a hierarchical type of thing because it does start at the top. Okay. You as a company, as an owner, you have a strategy that you're trying to implement that strategy. Okay. When you have that strategy, what's the frameworks we're trying to do to implement that strategy? And when you put together a framework, all you're trying to do is decide what the boundaries are. We're not going to go outside of this. We're not going to go outside of this. We're going to work within these boundaries. So therefore, you narrowed it down. All right. Then you take the next step and take it down to your managers. Okay. So your manager is saying, okay, here's the boundaries we have to work within. What are the systems and processes we need to have in place to make sure we stay within those boundaries? We have a routine place to make that happen. All right. So you have these systems in place. And then also the manager is going to say, all right, in order to make those systems to work, they're on board also. What are the recipes we need to have in place to make these systems, make these processes work? Then you take those recipes, so you're down to your front line and saying, here are the recipes you want to work. How do we want to make these things work? And that's where you get the gems, because they're the guys who live it day after day after day.
Exactly.
But if you're a manager or you're an executive, you don't see the little quirks that happen. Now, there's things they know that's not written down. It's in their head. Yep. Unless you give them the opportunity to give their input, you as a company are going to lose that. And when you lose that, very few times do you see managers or even executives go to the front line and get input. That's what causes disengaged employees, because people, they feel no one cares. No one will listen to me. Yep. So they don't care. I don't care. Okay, I'm just going to do my job and not let them lose that money day after day after day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And you talk about having disengaged employees, right?
Yes.
We got to get rid of that. And one of those ways is to be listening to them, to be giving them responsibility and additional responsibility over time, right?
Hmm.
Um, what are some ways that people can kind of, are there ways to sniff out who will and who won't be a disengaged employee when you're before you hire? I have such a hard time with that.
Well, I won't say there's ways to talk about who's engaged or disengaged employees, but I think for me, the concept comes back to values. I mean, I got to hire for a certain set of values. I could teach skills. I could teach steps.
Exactly
But,
right.
I can't teach integrity. There's certain things you can't
Yep.
teach. I can't teach initiative, those kind of things. So what are the values that, number one, the values I want to have for my employees are the same values I want to have for my company. And when those values align, we all work together and we're going in the same directions. Our values are not competing. And our values are not slogans you put on the wall that everybody reads once a year when it's time to update them.
Yeah.
So I
Yep.
think the key comes down into make sure the value you're hiring for values. And how do we determine what our values are? Behaviors. But, we just demonstrate our values by our behaviors. And that's where that culture crew, when we talk about the working agreements, when you
Yep.
start measuring and you start judging performance, not on only results, but on behaviors. And when a behavior is out of line, that's where you got to step up and address that. You can't sugarcoat that. You can't turn a blind eye. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And what are some ways that I always say that when you're interviewing somebody, that individual is never going to be on better
The best
behavior,
behavior.
right?
Yeah,
That
the best
they're
behavior.
exactly. They're not going to be better than they are in that interview. So what are some ways that we can kind of start to uncover some of their values and learn
Okay.
about what their values are before we actually hire them and kind of put them to the test?
Okay. Well, okay. If we're talking about behaviors, all right. If it's a behavior that's consistent, they would have had to demonstrate it before. So you're going to ask some questions about. You're going to kind of set up a scenario. You're going to kind of set up a story. How would you handle that? And when they start responding to that, if they have no answer, that's not their value. Okay. When they can start using their background and behaviors of what they've done in the past to answer your question now, you got something to work with. But if it's a foreign concept like you're looking at deer in the headlights, that's not the right person.
Yeah, I like this idea, right? Because and you can kind of tell by, are they using personal examples, right? You ask them a question, hey, what do
Yes.
you do in this scenario? And they're like, actually, that reminds me of one time I had, an employee that was doing XYZ, and this is how I handled it, versus them kind of mulling it over, having a really difficult time with the question.
Right, right, right. Or or sidestep it, or give you a quote or something they
Right.
read in a book.
Right. All of a sudden they're talking about something else and you're like,
Yeah.
wait, but what happened to the question I asked?
Right, right,
So
right.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, and we're in a position right now where there's a tight labor force. I feel like there are a lot of jobs. Economy seems to be, pretty strong. Some businesses are growing, but man, it's tough to find good people right now. And so we have to be, which makes it hard, right? Because sometimes
It makes it
beggars
hard.
can't be choosers,
Mhm.
right? But I always say that, you're better off not having somebody than hiring the wrong person.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I'm gonna, at least from my perspective, I'm gonna kind of give you a feel for how I approach it. Okay, think about the concept of a NASCAR racing team, and you have the NASCAR. You have this special car that's built for that special situation, and you have your driving team and your pit crew. So you have your vehicle and you have your drivers. They have to function together as one. Does that make sense? All right. So when you take that same analogy and bring it to a company, your company is the vehicle. So I want to make sure my company's fine-tuned is the way I need to have my company. I want to make sure my drivers, which is my leadership team, and my employees are all working together. So when you have that together, that fine-tunedness of the company and the fine-tunedness of your employees, people are going to want to come work for you. You're going to attract the best talent. People are going to talk about you. So I mean, so you're not competing as well they're coming to you.
Yeah, you know what? I recently, along those lines, I made a fairly large mistake recently where I hired upper level manager that was a poor cultural fit. We
Uh-huh.
didn't know in the beginning, very highly skilled, very motivated. Just wasn't the right fit. He ruffled feathers. He wasn't a team player.
Uh-huh.
And I realized that early on. We went, he, did some things he shouldn't have done, and I didn't fire him immediately. We put him on suspension. We kind of went through the disciplinary process, and I had several members of my executive team saying, "Fire him, fire him, fire him." And you know what? The number one reason why I didn't wasn't because I didn't I knew that he wasn't the right fit.
Uh-huh.
I felt bad for him, right?
Okay.
I end up keeping him for another 3 days. Within 3 days of him coming back after suspension, he did something else that was completely unacceptable with who we are, and then I fired him. Right. But when
Exactly.
you mentioned that you're gonna get better talent just because of the people that they'll be working with. It is true, right?
Yes.
So one thing that I would, my executive team was telling me, it wasn't necessarily, hey, he's not doing a good job. It's, hey, what are the other people that work here that have been here for years? What are they going to think about how you value the culture of the company just by keeping him around, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing I try to help people remember, people implement strategy, not companies. And if you have the
Exactly.
wrong people, it's not going to work.
Exactly. No, and that's the thing, is that sometimes we settle, sometimes we have a seat that we need filled, sometimes we're so busy that we go we go through this process so quickly, right? And there's this
Mhm.
proverb, right? Slow to hire, quick to fire.
Yep, yep,
And,
yep.
and you know what? It's nice in saying, but sometimes it's hard.
It's hard.
It can
It's
be
going to be,
hard.
because it comes back to affect you. You got a lot of things to do, and you got an open position there. And sometimes you settle for, because you want to take some of the weight off yourself because you have so much on your plate. And I understand exactly where you're coming from, but sometimes you might have to bite. Well, let me ask you this: that situation you just talked about. Think
Hmm.
about the internal agony that you personally went through. You
Yeah.
wrestle with yourself probably day after day. Think about the impact on your company, and think about the impact on the rest of the culture. I mean,
Yeah.
all of those were negative.
And you're 100% right. And the longer that it went on, luckily it was a period of about a week,
Okay.
right? And years ago, it would have taken me months,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Right.
So I'm getting faster, Wayne.
That's good. That's good. That's growth. We call
Yeah,
growth.
exactly. But you're right. It just causes so much more harm than not having somebody there at all,
Well,
right?
think about those companies now that do that and don't address it. They sugarcoat it. They're passive leadership. They don't want to rock the boat.
Yep.
They close their eyes. They don't see it,
Yep.
but the rest of the company does. So what is that?
Yep.
So that makes me more disengaged. When I'm
Yeah.
saying you don't show up with this, okay, you don't really care. I mean,
Yep.
the dynamics of the leadership team and what they do and how they function together has a huge impact on the entire company.
That's true. And I think kind of along those same lines is your people start to lose respect for you,
Yes.
right? You
Yes.
keep these disengaged, inefficient employees on board, and they're going to start thinking, geez, like, I don't know if I trust this guy to lead the company. If he allows something so blatant to happen right
Right.
under his nose.
Right. I mean, how many days are they're seeing that, and they're at their desk looking out for the next job. They're looking on Facebook.
Yeah,
When you're engaged, you look forward to coming to work. You're going to put your all in
exactly.
at work. I mean, so disengaged versus engaged, think about the impact on your bottom line.
Yeah.
How much is that costing you?
Yeah. And I think, out of everything, just having employees that are there for the right reasons, that are motivated, excited about their work,
Mhm.
I think more than anything, kind of going back to operational costs, that is really going to help the bottom line.
Yep, yep, yep. It's operational costs becomes from because of how you utilize your resources. I'm gonna go back to the concept I said before: your management, your manpower, your money, and your materials. They're the 4 resources every team has. How do you use them? Do you have a system in place to use them effectively? And what I found from an operation standpoint, most people don't. And so one of the things we've tried to do, we have done over the years, and it's worked effectively, is we have what we call a 3-week rolling schedule. Of a 3-week rolling schedule, you're looking 3 weeks out. So 2 weeks out is our forecasted schedule. Next week's our planned schedule, and this is our operating schedule. So when you have a forecasted schedule, you're seeing what you're going to be doing 2 weeks out.
Yep.
Do I have the resources? Do I have the materials? What happens now? You have your schedule, and you're thinking you're going to do this week. Oh, Bill's on vacation, or oh, I'm out of this material. So what happens? Everything stops. That's money you're leaving on the table. So if you could look at forecasting and planning and then operating.
If you have
and making
enjoyed
sure
today's
nothing goes
podcast,
from that
please leave us a
operating schedule,
rating. And for
it's
daily
100%
inspiration
there,
and
number
business
one.
tips,
And the
follow
second
Allan
thing
on
about how we
Instagram.
make sure we're
Until
planning
next
for
time,
long-term
remember,
success
we build
is
the
our
future
operating
one
schedule,
entrepreneur at a
what I
time.
call is the only measure we measure. Because if you hit 90% of your operating schedule, and you do it week after week after week, you're going to have profitability, and you're going to have the money to sustain your growth. But if you have an operating schedule and it's 50% this week and 30% this week, and why? Because you're letting distractions come in. You're letting other people's lack of planning become your emergency. So that operating schedule is your company's Bible, and everybody's geared to making sure that works. And how do you do that? You look 2 weeks out, make sure you have the resources. Look a week out, making sure you have the things you need. When it gets on that schedule, it's there. It's the Bible.
Yeah. And I think planning is so important, even though you don't have a crystal ball, right? In business, you could plan whatever you want. And something I usually tell people, especially when I'm creating, projections for the following year or budgets, I usually say, hey, this is the best that we've got. Right. I know it's going to be off in one direction or the other. I don't know how much, but when you have a plan, then you have that starting point, and you're in a position to make adjustments as changes come. You lose somebody, you acquire a large client, you're in a better position because you had made all of these steps, you created these steps to plan. And so you're more agile. So
can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
And from the concept of planning, particularly when you're putting together that planning, you're right. Stuff happens, circumstances occur. So when you're looking at that plan, you're planning, I only plan for 80% of my resources. All right. So therefore, that 20%, that can be there to handle the emergencies. That can be there to handle the stuff that come up. But if I know I got 80% of my resources are there or committed, I'm going to make happen, stuff's going to happen. And I have that little float that when I was back in the maintenance area, we had this concept back in the maintenance area. That was our do it now team. That was a team that when the executive vice president calls up and wants XYZ and he's not on the schedule, that do it now team was available. That was your float to sort of go take care of that, because it happened invariably. Someone who with power and authority wants to jerk your chain and make your schedule change. So I learned that a long time ago.
I like that 80% rule, right? Where and I know that, with some of my companies, we spread ourselves too thin, right?
Yes.
We know there's a busy season coming up, and as opposed to like budgeting 80% of the, do it today stuff, I'm budgeting 100 or even 110%. And then I'm surprised. And then I'm surprised when we run into issues, right? Whereas if we have everything we need plus 20%, because that 20% we're still going to need. We just don't know when and how.
Exactly.
Right?
You're not going to stop emergencies. You're not going to stop those things that come up. So build it into your schedule.
I love it, Wayne. Well, hey, this has been a great conversation. Where can people find more about you, all these great things that you're doing, all the great tools that you have to help CEOs and business leaders?
Okay. As I say, the name of the company is Grow Company Profits. The website is growcompanyprofits.com. My email address is wayne@growcompanyprofits.com. But I want to leave your audience with access to a tool. And when I talk about the concept of disengaged employees, unnecessary complexity, and hidden costs, they're what as I say, called value drains. And what they're value drains because our strategy, culture, and operations are not in alignment. How do you find out how your strategy, culture, and operations are aligned now? We have a tool called the Alignment Analyzer. It's a free tool. It's an online interactive video series where we ask basically about 40 questions, and I'm trying to get a feel for the level to which you agree or disagree with the statements that I'm making. And what we're doing is comparing your current leadership team, your current company, to that of an operationally excellent company. When it's all said and done, you'll see how your strategy, culture, and operations align. And you'll be able to get that through a site called uh, alignmentanalyzer.com. And there'll probably be some show notes, and we'll put those into the show notes. But that's a tool I think people can at least get a starting point of going from there. We have other tools that are available. There are also free tools. And we talk about value drains. I have another tool called the value drain detector. And that value drain detector lets you know to what extent are value drains infested into your company. So it gives you an idea of what level of disengaged employees, what level of unnecessary complexity, and what level of hidden costs. That's another free tool. And the third free tool that after you take those two, we have a number called put a number on it. Once you know how much you're invested with value drains, what percentage of your operating budget are you leaving on the table because of that? Once you know that number, you're going to make a decision. Am I going to live with that or am I going to change? So we give people some tools to make some decisions. Any company that's an operationally exceptional company, they didn't start that way. They started at some starting point and made a conscious decision to change. We just help people see where they start from. If they want to help change, we can help them change. So that's kind of what we do, and we go from there.
Yeah, and I think those tools sound like very useful, because as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as business leaders, sometimes we get used to just looking at the same thing, right? We're just looking at the same thing. But when we have something, a third party, we have, this an outside tool that somebody else created, then we start looking in different spots, right? And that allows us to grow and identify things that we didn't think of before.
Well, I mean, Allan, when you think about it, everybody likes to compare themselves and see how they stack up. That's
Right.
How these tools do. How do you stack up against an operating excellent company? And once you know the facts, knowledge is power. Then you can make some decisions.
Yep. I love it. Well, that's great, Wayne. I appreciate your time today. Everybody, Wayne Washington, he is the doctor of operations, clearly knows his stuff. Make sure to check him out. Thanks for joining us today, Wayne. We appreciate your time, appreciate your knowledge, appreciate your experience.
Thank you very much. A pleasure being here.
If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a rating. And for daily inspiration and business tips, follow Allan on Instagram. Until next time, remember, we build the future one entrepreneur at a time.